The secret to immortality. Since the dawn of time, humans have chased one impossible dream: immortality. From alchemists and emperors to billionaires and biotech labs, our obsession with living forever certainly isn't dying. But what if I told you that nature has already figured out the secret? What if true immortality isn't locked away in the future, but swimming silently in the ocean? There are animals on this planet that simply do not die, at least not like we do. Not from old age, not from disease. They are eternal. In the wildest corners of our planet, there are creatures that outlive empires, ancient sharks older than Shakespeare, and jellyfish that can literally reset their life cycles. They're living time machines, rewriting the rules of one of the most poorly understood biological phenomena in science. Join me as we explore the animals around the world living not just centuries, but forever. What secrets do they hold? How have they tricked death itself? And could their strange, powerful biology hold the key to extending our own lives? Galapagos tortoises. We're going to start small and build up to immortality in this video, and our journey begins on a tiny island directly to the west of Ecuador in South America. The world first heard about Galapagos more than 470 years ago after the Dominican friar Fray Tomás de Berlanga, Bishop of Panama's ship, was blown off course while sailing to Peru. He arrived on March 10, 1535, and his account, the first written record of the Galapagos Islands, described giant tortoises, cacti, the inhospitable terrain, and the difficulty of finding water, characteristic features of the islands. Galapagos giant tortoises often live well over a century, and it's not uncommon for them to live for over 150 years. As we seek to find nature's immortal beings, the comparable youthful exuberance of these wonderful creatures that seem to age as slowly as they move is truly remarkable. Ironically, it's actually humans that have been moving at a leisurely pace to try and find out the secrets to these long lifespans. It's only been in the last decade that we've found some answers, and it's fair to say it's something the science community wasn't expecting. An extensive international study led by Penn State and Northeastern Illinois University, the most comprehensive study of aging and longevity to date, examined aging and longevity in reptiles and amphibians, with data from 107 populations across 77 species worldwide in 2022. The research revealed that certain species, particularly tortoises, turtles, crocodilians, and salamanders, exhibit notably low aging rates and extended lifespans. Beyond just simply analyzing how old something was physically, the research also focused on age from a biological perspective, senescence, a fascinating insight into how much cells and other bodily functions have deteriorated over time. The study found that physical protective traits, such as the hard shells of many turtle species, contribute to slower or even negligible biological aging. It's not that these species don't experience the passage of time, but rather they aren't as affected by it as others. These findings reaffirm the notion that ectotherms, cold-blooded animals, universally age more slowly due to lower metabolic rates, suggesting instead that protective phenotypes play a significant role in influencing aging processes. To expand on the metabolism side of things a little further, humans have higher rates of metabolism because they can create heat inside their own bodies through the reactions happening in their cells. Take respiration, for example. The production of ATP is actually quite inefficient and causes energy to be lost in the form of heat. It's this heat which, when retained, helps us and other endotherms maintain a stable body temperature that doesn't vary with the surrounding temperature. However, this process also gives rise to hazardous byproducts which can damage their DNA, particularly for reactive oxygen species. These ROSs are charged molecules that can cause oxidative damage to cells, which contributes to their deterioration. On the contrary, our tortoise friends take heat from sunlight to fuel their metabolism, meaning their metabolism is slower. This may result in them producing fewer ROSs, meaning less oxidative stress and a longer life for them and other ectotherms. There was a particularly famous giant tortoise known George, locally as Lonesome George, who was the last known member of his species Chelinoides abingdonii, a Galapagos subspecies. Sadly, George passed away in 2012, but his death gave new life to new research. In the years subsequently, researchers at Yale University and the University of Oviedo in Spain have conducted genetic analysis of DNA from Lonesome George and samples from other giant tortoises of the Galapagos. Amazingly, they found their DNA possessed a number of gene variants linked to DNA repair, immune response, and cancer suppression not possessed by shorter-lived vertebrates. A study led by the University at Buffalo took this further and found that these tortoises possess extra copies of certain genes known as duplications, which are believed to enhance their ability to combat aging and disease. Laboratory tests demonstrated that the tortoise's cells are exceptionally sensitive to stress-related damaged proteins, leading them to self-destruct through apoptosis more readily than cells from other turtle species. This proactive elimination of potentially problematic cells may help prevent tumor formation, offering insights into the tortoise's extended lifespans and resilience against age-related diseases. Greenland Shark. As we move away from the exotic climes of the eastern Pacific Ocean and the irresistibly adorable giant tortoises nestled there, we find ourselves in a very different part of the world. Deep beneath the frozen Arctic, where sunlight never reaches and time itself seems to slow, something ancient stirs. This creature moves like a ghost. It's silent, cold, and ethereal. The Greenland shark is Earth's longest living vertebrate that we know of, drifting through the deep for hundreds of years. More specifically, for at least 250 years and possibly up to even 500. These creatures are tantalizingly mysterious. Despite being one of the world's largest marine species and reaching lengths up to 7 meters, they have largely eluded scientific study. Until then, most of what we knew about Greenland sharks came from the historical records of commercial landings. They were fished in the North Atlantic for their oily livers until 1960, and a limited harvest still occurs in Greenland. But now we can finally document them swimming in their natural environment. Scientists have known for some time that Greenland sharks live extremely long lives, but they didn't have a way to determine how long. The age of other shark species can be estimated by counting growth bands on fin spines or on the shark's vertebrae, much like rings on a tree. Greenland sharks, however, have no fin spines and no hard tissues in their bodies. Their vertebrae are too soft to form the growth bands seen in other sharks. Scientists could only guess that the sharks lived a long time based on what they did know. The sharks grow at a very slow rate, less than 1 centimeter per year, and they tend to reach over 6 meters in size, so the chances were these things were pretty old indeed. But then, in 2016, something rose to the surface that changed the trajectory of biology as we know it. The Greenland shark officially became the world's longest living vertebrate. Having lived to an estimated age of nearly 400 years, a female Greenland shark set the new record for longevity. She was born during the reign of Charles I, was a youngster when René Descartes set out his rules of thought, and the Great Fire of London raged. She reached adulthood as George II ascended the throne, was having kids around the time that the American Revolution kicked off. Oh, and she also lived through 2 world wars. Julius Nielsen, lead author of the research from the University of Copenhagen that made the discovery, was able to determine this shark's age with a methodology nearly as creepy as the animal itself. Inside the shark's eyes, there are proteins that are formed before birth and do not degrade with age, like a fossil preserved in amber. Scientists discovered that they could determine the age of the sharks by carbon dating these proteins. Nielsen and his team looked into the eyes of 28 female Greenland sharks, discovering that the largest shark they found, a 5-meter female, was between 272 and 512 years old, according to their estimates. It's worth noting that this is just an estimate. Carbon dating cannot provide a definitive age. But scientists continue to refine this method and may provide more accurate measurements in the future. But even at the lower end of the estimates, a 272-year lifespan make the Greenland shark the longest-lived vertebrate. Why do they live such long lives? Much like our tortoise friends on the other side of the world, one theory to explain this long lifespan is that the Greenland shark has a very slow metabolism, an adaptation to or a product of the deep, cold waters it inhabits. Ultimately, because they're ectotherms, the temperature of the water affects their metabolism. A NOAA remotely operated vehicle diving off New England in 2013 encountered a Greenland shark at a depth of 783 meters, but these sharks are known to dive as deep as 2,200 meters. They're also the only shark that can withstand the cold waters of the Arctic Ocean year-round. As such, their slow metabolism could explain the shark's slow growth, slow aging, and sluggish movement. Its top speed is under 2.9 kilometers per hour. The metabolic theory was backed up by research presented at the Society of Experimental Biology Conference in 2024 by lead author Ewan Camplison, who suggested the shark's longevity could be related to their metabolic activity, which does not seem to change over time like it does in other animals. To measure the shark's metabolism in the new study, the researchers took tissue samples from the muscle of 23 Greenland sharks. The team then measured the activity of 5 different enzymes in the samples to work out their metabolic rate and their response to different environmental temperatures. The researchers then calculated the age of each shark by measuring their body length, finding that the sampled sharks ranged from 60 to 200 years old. Surprisingly, when the researchers compared the enzyme activity, they found that there was no change across the different ages. The stable metabolism across Greenland sharks' ages suggests they don't degenerate like other animals do, which is likely the reason for their long lifespans. Although they've probably never met, both Greenland sharks and giant tortoises have the key to longevity in common, and it comes from their metabolism. So far, we've met a rather wonderful tortoise named George that posthumously provided us with some vital de-aging information, and we've encountered the longest-living vertebrate on Earth with the spooky Greenland shark. On that note, you do wonder if these majestic sharks hadn't been hunted as much as they were, might we have found even older specimens? Black coral. In our oceans, time still continues to stand still, and things get really intense. It's time to meet a marine organism 4,265 years old, who, despite its black core, lives a very happy life. At more than 4,200 years old, a colony of deep-water black coral has the accolade of being the oldest living skeletal accreting marine organism known to science. In other words, it's the oldest living animal that can build a skeleton in the sea. Given how little we know about our oceans, it seems fitting that pretty much everything on our quest for immortality finds itself somewhere in the deep blue, and unsurprisingly, that's where we remain here. This time, we're heading to Hawaii, although deep-sea coral is found across the world, to investigate a very specific kind of deep-sea black coral called Leiopathes annosa. First thing to say is, as you might have noticed, it's not black, at least not on the outside. Whilst coral, quite rightly, has the reputation of being bright, multicolored beacons of happiness sprinkled around the world, this coral actually has a black skeleton. Immediately, it's pretty interesting, and the family-friendly corals we're so accustomed to seeing suddenly have a relative on the dark side. Imagine peering through the window of a submersible at depths of 300 to 480 meters, 1,000 to 1,600 feet, beneath the Hawaiian Islands, and seeing what looks like a mini forest, golden brown coral with a hidden black core, grouped together over vast distances with a typical tree-like structure of the genus. 4,000 years ago, where I come from in the UK, the Bronze Age was just beginning, and here in Hawaii, these corals were merely in their infancy. Most shallow water corals rely on symbiotic algae called zooxanthellae to convert sunlight into energy. Black corals instead eat floating particles in the water column with their polyps. This is one of the reasons why black corals are more tree-like than shallow water hard corals. They grow vertically and then branch to maximize their ability to obtain food. Black corals likely started from a single species that lived between the shallows and the deep sea around 600 million years ago. The ancestors of the first black corals began to diversify in the Silurian period, 437 million years ago, a time when jawless fishes and trilobites were common throughout the ocean. These early black corals thrived in the continental slope, the area where the ocean floor gradually slants down from the shallow coast waters to the deep abyssal plain. Filter feeding became a popular mode of feeding as the ocean was filled with small creatures called zooplankton that drifted throughout the open water. Black corals took advantage of this abundance and thrived. Ever since then, the black coral has remained across the region, its tree-like branches reaching out for invisible food. Even trying to understand the origins of such a creature took science some time, so determining its age was even trickier. To do that, researchers from Lawrence, Livermore, Stanford University, and the University of California at Santa Cruz collected individual samples off the coast of Oahu. Using carbon dating, the team were able to arrive at the grand old age of 4,265. The ages imply that the coral skeletons grow much more slowly than previously thought, only 4 micrometers per year, about the diameter of a human blood cell. The tiny coral polyps that live inside the skeletons are only a few years old, meaning they are continually replaced for centuries to millennia while the supporting skeleton builds up around them. Black corals also thrive in deep, dark waters where they do not rely on symbiotic algae for food, instead filtering water using tentacles on their branches. You can begin to see how this deep-sea adaptation contributes to their longevity by minimizing exposure to surface-related stressors. There's probably a life lesson for everyone there. Surround yourself with things that don't stress you out, and you'll have a pretty happy and long life. Antarctic glass sponge. In fact, it was around during the last ice age, nearly 15,000 years ago, when much of the northern hemisphere was covered in ice sheets and woolly mammoths still roamed the world. A sponge, you ask? How does an everyday object I use to wash plates and forks make a list alongside some of the planet's most unique creatures? It can be tricky to actually see sponges as animals, stationary and plant-like as they are, but they represent some of the longest living animals on the planet, and they're kind of bonkers. The Antarctic glass sponge, known as the giant volcano sponge or the Anoxycalyx jubini, can grow up to 1.5 meters, 5 feet in diameter, and 2 meters, 6.5 feet in height, and it can live for 15,000 years. Scientists have arrived at this number by attempting to estimate the age of individuals of the species based on modeling their rates of oxygen consumption and energy production. One individual was found to be around 23,000 years old, according to one research team's models, with upper estimates saying that the animals could live as long as 40,000 years. However, those ages might be a little on the high side according to further analysis. This huge number is not necessarily down to the animal itself, but rather as a result of the geological changes that occurred during its lifetime. Dr. Suzanne Gotti pointed out that because of sea level fluctuations associated with the last glacial maximum, it's likely that where the giant volcano sponge lived would no longer be covered in water and it would have been left high and dry. As such, she concluded that no marine invertebrate in this area can be older than 15,000 years, which is still mighty impressive. Let's have a look at why they can stick around for so long. They are multicellular animals, sitting near the base of Darwin's evolutionary tree at the interface between the single-celled protozoa and metazoans with nervous systems, like those highly coordinated hunters and trappers, the jellyfish. At some stage in evolution, colonies of single cells developed a competitive edge by moving to true multicellularity, with individual units becoming specialized for different tasks. Glass sponges are animals commonly found in the deep ocean. Their tissues contain glass-like structural particles called spicules, of which there are 6, and they are made of silica. So uniquely impressive are these animals that they possess the ability to channel light through this silica in the manner of fiber optics. Some species of glass sponges produce extremely large spicules that fuse together in beautiful patterns to form a glass house, a complex skeleton that often remains intact even after the sponge itself dies. Called porifera because they are porous or pore-bearing, sponges are animals designed around a unique body plan of canals and chambers through which they pump water to extract food. There is no centralized gut, no front or back. They lack conventional nerves and muscle, which means movement is only at the pace of the individual cell crawling. The most famous glass sponge is a species known as the Venus flower basket, which builds its skeleton in a way that entraps a certain species of crustacean inside for life. This sponge often houses 2 small boxer shrimp, a male and a female, who live out their lives inside the sponge, which is both the coolest and creepiest thing all at the same time. The crustaceans breed, and when their offspring are tiny, they escape to find a new Venus flower basket of their own. This relationship works both ways. The pair inside the basket clean it, and in return, the basket provides food for the crustaceans through its waste. This story has a not-so-happy ending, as the shrimp eventually grow too large to escape the sponge, so they are forced to stay put for the rest of their lives. As they die, they leave behind silica mats meters deep on the seafloor, providing prime substrate for other sponges to settle and grow. Hopefully next time you reach for a sponge at home, you'll see it in a different, albeit slightly creepy, light. So far, we've covered vast stretches of Earth's geological history and met some of the animals that have been around to witness how our planet has changed. There is still one creature to visit that has found the secret to cheating death itself. Immortal jellyfish. What most of us picture as a jellyfish, that ghostly, transparent creature with stinging tentacles, is actually just the final stage of its life cycle. At least it should be, because not all jellyfish play by the rules, and one species has found a way to cheat death entirely. Meet the immortal jellyfish, Turritopsis Dohrnii. Barely 3 millimeters across, smaller than your fingernail, it holds an astonishing ability. When stressed, injured, or starving, it can roll back its biological clock and start life over again. Most jellyfish follow a familiar pattern. Eggs and sperm produce free-swimming larvae which settle on a hard surface, grow into polyps, and bud off into adults called medusae. But when the immortal jellyfish reaches the medusa stage and faces danger, instead of dying, it collapses into a blob-like cyst on the sea floor. Within 24 to 36 hours, this blob transforms into a polyp, its previous life stage, ready to grow into a new medusa. This rare trick, called transdifferentiation, allows its cells to reprogram themselves into a completely different body plan. In perfect conditions, this cycle can repeat indefinitely, meaning it never dies of old age. It's the biological equivalent of a butterfly turning back into a caterpillar instead of dying, and then re-emerging as a butterfly again. The species was first described in 1883, but its immortality wasn't noticed until the 1980s, when biology students Christian Sommer and Giorgio Bavastrello accidentally observed medusae reverting to polyps in their lab jars. The discovery, along with the catchy nickname Immortal Jellyfish, captured global attention. Of course, immortality has its limits. Sea turtles, slugs, and other predators happily snack on these defenseless invertebrates. Their eternal life only works in perfect conditions, where nothing interrupts their miraculous reset button. To be honest, I could talk about these creatures all day, and there's one man in Japan who does more than just talk about them. Japanese scientist Shin Kubota has kept populations of immortal jellyfish since the 1990s. It's a thankless task, as the species are nearly impossible to monitor in lab environments, and the work is incredibly time-consuming. In an NYT article, Kubota details having to monitor the colonies daily, even slicing up their miniature meals of brine shrimp eggs under a microscope so they're small enough for the jellyfish to eat. But his patience paid off, and after 2 years of studying, he was able to give an exact number for how often the jellyfish performed their miraculous miracle. Captive colonies of the jellyfish rejuvenated themselves up to 10 times, sometimes at intervals of just 1 month. After reading about how jellyfish seem to have achieved eternal life, I wouldn't blame you for asking one major question: how can I get me some of that? Unfortunately, while the immortal jellyfish can go full Benjamin Button at will, humans are a long way off mastering this level of transdifferentiation. Instead, the hope is that studying what happens in these jellyfish can tell us how their genes change cells, and how these changed cells integrate with others. I don't think I need to say much more, do I? It feels like one of those videos you just need to sit with for a little bit and process what you've just learned, so I'll let you do just that. We probably could have made a video about each one of these amazing creatures individually, but I wanted to show through different passages of time just what nature is capable of, and the amazing/scary/weird, or whatever word you want to use for it. Thing is, I don't think we've even scratched the surface. It feels counterintuitive to say, but I have a feeling nature's revelations don't end with immortality. What comes next, who knows, but we'll be here to talk about it, I can assure you of that. It was pretty tough getting it down to just 5, so if there are any animals you would like to see, or if you feel I've missed anything, let us know in the comments. Imagine that happened to you. Would you want to live forever? How would you feel about switching back and forth from adult to child like a jellyfish? Sometimes when you're learning new stuff, it feels like it takes forever, but like our immortal jellyfish, I think I've found a way around it.